Hi everybody, Brian here. Welcome to a sort of extracurricular Discographers video. During our episode on hybrid theory, I mentioned that I would put out a video elaborating on some of the debate around the use of the chord name Sus2 in the nu metal context. So in order to dig into that, let's first take a look at just the basics of chords. A chord is usually built out of three notes, known as the first, the third, and the fifth. The third determines whether a chord is major or minor, but it is very common in rock genres to see a chord that skips the third altogether, playing only the first and fifth. This is known as a power chord or a 5 chord, and since it skips the 3, we have no way of knowing whether or not the chord is major or minor, making the chord kind of vague. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our main point of interest, the Sus2 chord. The way a Sus2 chord works is that instead of playing the third note in a chord, you play the one just beneath it, the second. Because this omits the third note, we still have no way of knowing whether it's major or minor. We have another kind of vague chord. Most often a Sus2 chord is played with the first, second, and fifth notes in that order. Here's what that chord looks like on guitar. You have your first, your second, and your fifth. But in nu metal, there's a particular version of this chord, the one we're interested in, where they space it out a little bit differently. They take the second note and move it up an octave, so we get the spacing of first, fifth, and second, the octave up. Now the second and octave up can be referred to as the ninth, because an octave is 8 notes and we're going one note past that. So on guitar, this can be achieved by basically playing a mutation of a regular 3-note power chord. If you're tuned in drop D, the regular 3-note power chord can be played with one finger, like so. And then if you take the top note and raise it by one whole step, you can end up with your Sus2 chord. Take a listen to how the power chord sounds fairly clean, and how the Sus2 chord has a little bit more wobble and grit to it. Now, as I mentioned, there has been some debate within the musical community about how to name these chords in this context. If you play this second note an octave up, which puts it above the first and the fifth, you can call it a ninth. Now, the note in the context of this C chord is still a D, regardless of whether you call it the second or the ninth, and that's given rise to some people referring to these chords as 9 chords. In this case, it'd be a C9. And this is wrong, because a 9 chord includes the first, third, fifth, seventh, and ninth notes. Some people may also refer to it as an add 9 chord. In this case, you'd say C add 9, and that is also wrong, because that still includes the first, third, fifth, and ninth. Even so, there's still something to be said for the concept of calling these chords some kind of ninth chord, and here's why. When you use Sus2 chords, there's an implication that you are taking a major or minor chord and making it more neutral or vague. When you use ninths in a chord, there's sort of an implication that you are adding extensions and color to the top of a major or minor chord. Now, these extension notes above the chord provide color without necessarily changing the major or minor identity of the chord. In this case, the bass chord is a power chord. It's already not major or minor, already a neutral, vague sound. So you could make the argument that adding the ninth above it is functioning more like an extension of that already vague chord rather than a suspension to make it more vague. So if we accept that premise, we could call it a C5 chord with an add 9, a C5 add 9. And that might potentially actually be a more accurate description of the chord's function. That being said, 5 add 9 is a confusing mouthful, and the consensus among music theorists seems to be to call it a Sus2. We've already done that on the show. That's what we're going to continue to do. Alright, we out.